Hello, everyone. I am Fahey, Superintendent of Horticulture Education for Morris County Park Commission. And I'm very excited to be here. Thank you for having me. I hope that you learn at least one thing, but I think you'll probably learn a few more than just one thing. So first of all, this is one of my favorite topics, because most people ask me the glamorous questions like, you know, what color is this going to bloom, or how much sun does this need? But most people don't think about their soil. They think, you know, this is the soil I have, and then they try to grow plants, and then there might be some issues coming from the soil, which they're thinking is from something else. So really, the gardener should always start with the soil. So that's what we're going to talk about today. There we go. So the first question is, and we, as a horticulturist, we always joke about this because people will say, oh, you know, I need some dirt for my pot. So we don't use the word dirt. Dirt is what you sweep up, you throw in the garbage. Dirt has no nutrients and should never be near plants. So it's like our joke, because people will always be like, can I have some dirt for my pot? And we'll be like, oh, I don't have any dirt, but we're talking about soil. So soil is made up of inorganic matter and organic matter. And we're going to start talking about inorganic matter first. So this is basically what's in soil. So you'll have sand, silt, clay, and organic matter. So the sand is large particles, just like what you see at the beach. Silt is a medium-sized particle, and clay are tiny particles. And then organic matter is just broken down leaves, which we'll see in a minute. So this is particle size, and this is really important to know, because this is what it tells you what's happening in your soil. So clay particles are really tiny. So, you know, when you put tiny things together, there's no spaces between them because they're tiny. So just hold on to these thoughts, and you'll see how that's really important later. So silt is a little bigger, so there's some spaces between your soil particles. And of course, sand and gravel, there's a lot of space. So the first part of our soil is sand. So sand has a lot of drainage, but no nutrients. So that means when you go to water, the water goes right through. If there's any nutrients, it just leaches right through. So if you have a sandy soil, you know, that's a problem that you have to think about. Silt is less drainage than the sand, but it still doesn't hold any nutrients. And then you have clay that has no drainage, which, you know, I mean, if you have clay soil, you know, it puddles, it's very thick, which is kind of sometimes hard to think about, because you see that the clay is very small particles, but it clumps together a lot, and so it sticks together. The good thing about clay, believe it or not, there is something good about clay. It's the particle that holds the nutrients. So your soil needs to have some clay. I feel like clay has gotten a bad rap because it's hard to dig, but you need some percentage of clay in your soil. So this is basically what you see. Clay, silt, and sand make up most soils. And a good combination of those is what we call loam. And loam is your ideal garden soil, which almost no one has, because that would be the perfect soil. And there's nothing perfect on earth. So I'm just going to show you this quickly, because I'm going to go through something at the end. I'm going to show it to you again. So this is our organic elements, the sand, silt, and clay. And this pyramid just shows you that you want a percentage of each to make up loam. And you can see that the loam is kind of in the middle of the pyramid. So if you have too much clay, too much sand, or too much silt, if you're in the extremes, it's a little bit hard to deal with the soil, but we're going to learn some techniques to handle especially the clay. So this is how you read the soil triangle. So if you have clay and you're going to say I have 21% clay, that's the blue line. It goes straight across. Your silt has 13% and it goes at an angle. And then the sand is 66% and it goes at an angle from the bottom. So these are angled. And then where they all meet, that's the kind of soil you have. So 21% clay, 66% sand, and whoops, sorry about that. That's what I wanted. There we go. Right, so that is sandy clay loam. So that's not actually a bad soil. That's a decent soil. So now you're going to determine your own soil type, and it's very easy. You just need a jar, a handful of soil, some water, and a couple of tablespoons of dish detergent. What you're going to do is put the soil in the jar, add the water so it fills the jar. So the soil should be like halfway, and then fill the jar with water, and then add in 2 tablespoons of dish detergent, and that dish detergent just helps the soil settle. And then what you'll get is it could be 1 to 3 days. So if you have a lot of clay, it's going to take about 3 days. If you have less clay, you can see it in 1 to 2 days. And what you're going to see is the layers of your soil. So in this picture, you can see there's 60% sand on the bottom, and then the silt is in the middle, and then the clay is on the top. And at the very top, which we can't see in the picture, we can see here, in this on the picture to the left, that's organic matter. So that's not really going, that floats actually. And that everybody's soil is going to have a little bit of different makeup, even on the same property. So the bottom picture shows if you take a sample in your woods or in your garden or in the field or your lawn, you're going to have different amounts of sand, silt, and clay, and possibly organic matter. But we want to know what's in our soil so we know what to plant or how to fix our soil if we decide to do that. So here is a typical sandy soil. So this one has 85%, but look at the organic matter line. It's very thin because it's all just going to drain right through the sand. And here we have our silty soil. Again, the organic matter is limited, and that's where you get a lot of nutrients and what the plant needs to survive. And you can see here the silt is 80%. Again, so it's less of drainage and holds no nutrients. But actually vegetable gardens do pretty well in silty soil as long as you add fertilizer. And then you have clay soil. So you can see here the clay is the brown color, 50% clay. But now look at your organic matter. It's much higher because it can't drain through the clay. So if you have clay soil and you're adding organic matter, it's going to hold much better. And then of course we have our perfect loamy soil, and you know that it's pretty even, but the organic matter is higher, clay is a little lower, but the silt and sand are pretty even. And this is the ideal soil. And pretty much you're going to get close to that, but maybe not exactly. So here's our soil pyramid again. And so what you want to do is when you have your jar, you're going to figure out your percentages, and then you're going to come to your pyramid. And so the clay will go straight across, the silt will come across on a diagonal, and the sand will be on a diagonal, like we saw in the first example. And then wherever those lines meet, that's the kind of soil you have. And this is important for, like I said, what you're going to plant. So I'll start out saying that there's ways to improve your soil. So clay soil, you add gypsum. So gypsum is the only thing that actually breaks, changes, I should say, the clay particles, because what it does is it makes the particles bigger, and then you have spaces in between for the drainage. I use gypsum. I think it works really well. The only thing is you have to be patient, because you can apply it once, but it takes about 3 years to fully activate. Now you might say, who wants to wait 3 years? But let's face it, 3 years goes by really fast, usually when you're not thinking about it. So I did a garden in Montclair that was on a hill, and it was completely clay. I couldn't even dig it the first year. And I put gypsum in. The way I had to do it, because there was a planting, was whenever I went to plant something, I put gypsum in the hole. And eventually, I did the garden for 20 years. Eventually, it became really nice soil. But if you have a smaller area, just wherever you're planting, you can just add the gypsum. There's also something called green sand. So this doesn't work as well, because basically it is a type of sand. And when you add sand to clay, all you have is sand and clay mixed, because it's not really working on the particles of the clay the way the gypsum did. But people do like to use this, and it does help. It's a soil amendment. It adds potassium and other micronutrients, which the gypsum is not doing. It doesn't burn your plants. It's safe to put in your soil any time of the year, and it doesn't really leach away. So it's beneficial. Green sand comes from areas that when the earth first started, there was oceans everywhere. And when the oceans receded, areas were left. And that's what those areas that you dig up were once marine, but now on land, that's green sand. So to use green sand, you can buy it, at the local garden center. It's a half cup around each rose bush. If you have a rose bush, 2 pounds per 100 square feet for a vegetable garden, 2 to 4 pounds for 100 square feet of flower beds. It is organically certified, and it won't burn your plants. So it's a really good option for loosening up the clay. Now there's another option that is kind of fun to try. So it's called using other plant material. So if you have a clay area and you plant buckwheat on the off season, the buckwheat releases exudates that break up the soil. So just by planting this, it's a natural way to break up the clay soil. I have not done this because, like I said, I'm pretty much a fan of the gypsum, but I thought this was really just another cool way to do it and to kind of experiment. Another thing you could use is called the forage radish, which is bio-drilling. And this alleviates compaction and serves as a living rototiller. So this is not a radish you would eat. You would just plant it when you're not using the bed to just break the clay up, because the taproot will break it up, but also the fine roots will go into the clay and make spaces. So you sow this at the end of the summer, it'll grow. It might get killed by the winter. If it doesn't, you just cut off the top and you let the rest of it disintegrate into the soil. But it's a very organic way to loosen up your soil. And you could also do this with turnips, but these are special varieties. So you wouldn't just use a regular turnip, and you wouldn't eat this turnip because it's not going to taste very well. So another thing you can do is plant plants that actually grow in the kind of soil you have. If you don't want to try to manipulate your soil, plant things that will grow in it. So here's a chart of plants that grow in clay. So I just did trees, shrubs, and perennials for you. Now, I think for you guys, probably the trees are taken care of by your association, but it's still fun to know. Crab apples, birch, amelanchier, and I'm going to show you a couple of pictures of those. The shrubs are potentilla, which I have a picture I'll show you in a minute. Hydrangea. Some people are surprised that hydrangea will grow in clay, but it's only this type. Annabelle hydrangea grows in clay. The blue ones will not. Annabelle's the white one. And then some perennials that can grow, because people want a flower garden and then they're like, oh, my soil's too hard. But aster, iris, bee balm, coneflower, sedum, hosta, and cardinal flower will all do well in the clay soil. So you don't have to do anything to your soil. You can just plant what grows in it. And these are the plants, some of the plants. So this is amelanchier trees growing in clay. And I love them because they have beautiful white flowers and then they get a nice round leaf. And then in the fall, they have beautiful fall color and they can also grow in part shade. Hornbeams are a tree that grows in the clay, and I love the texture of the leaf. So that's another interesting one. Here's the potentilla. So this is a small shrub. This is actually for you guys. This is a great shrub to plant. I know in front of your house that have a small bed. I don't know if it's like, you know, but you can, it gets like the size of an azalea. So it's like maybe 2 feet. It's perfect for there. And it blooms all summer, which people don't know that about this too. And it comes in white. It also comes in pink. And then Weigelia. So there are some Weigelias. This is spring blooming. There are some that get very big. So you guys would want a dwarf Weigelia. But again, you don't have to do anything to your soil. It'll grow in your clay soil. And then here's some bee balm and blue cardinal flower. So you can plant some really beautiful things in clay soil. So pretty much the same plants that grow in clay soil will grow in silty soil, very similar plants. Here's a dogwood tree. Flowering quince. So flowering quince, again, you'd probably want a dwarf variety. And also I have to say they bloom in the spring and I think they're gorgeous, but sometimes their habit can be a little bit weedy looking. So, you know, you have to definitely go with the dwarf on that one. And then of course the bearded iris. So plants that grow in the sand, and I don't know, maybe you have a shore house, because I know around here we don't have much sand, but just for informational. So crab apples are great. And you might think, oh, I don't want those big apples falling down on my yard. Because I remember as a kid, our neighbor across the street had them and they had these big apples fall on the lawn. Well, most crab apples today are now bred to have very small crab apples, and the birds usually eat them before they even hit the ground. So Caryopteris, I love this shrub. I actually have it in front of my house. It can grow in a wide range of soils. So even if you're not in sandy soil, this is a good one. And it blooms late. So it blooms in August to September. And lavender loves the sandy soil. Most people say they can't grow it, and it's because it stays too wet. Lavender wants to be really dry, so sandy soil is perfect for it. So now we have our organic elements. So this is what is really bringing a lot of nutrients to our soil. And organic matter comes from our compost. So the reason to add compost is it helps protect from erosion and compaction. So if any of you are on a hill or you know, from rain going through the bed, it stabilizes and regulates your pH. It allows for better root penetration, improves moisture retention, improves drainage in clay soils. So it's not going to change your clay soil, but again, it's going to add some spaces. Promotes fertility and availability of nutrients, stimulates root development, and suppresses soil-borne pathogens. So it'll even help with some insects. Okay, so this is all the math. I won't read all that. But basically what it's saying is 6 5-gallon buckets is all you need for 50 square feet. So you shouldn't be adding more than that, because I'll come to a slide that'll show you that too much compost is a problem, you know, and I know because we have a community garden at the Arboretum, and they always want to add compost. They want to add more compost, you know, and the compost does get used up, but too much is going to cause problems. So 6 pails for 50 square feet. So so here we go. So you can have too much compost. So you want about 10% of volume, about 1 to 2 inches a year. If you have too much compost, plants will not produce natural pesticides. And I know most people don't even realize that plants produce pesticides at all, but they do. They're protecting themselves. And if you give them too much compost, they will not produce any natural pesticides. So you'll have more disease and pest problems. It builds up soluble salts, and that stunts their growth. And actually, you can get more weeds by having too much compost, because some weeds like to have that rich soil. So, so 10% by volume, that's it for that. So I also know that a lot of you guys have containers, and people always ask me about the soil for containers. So it is confusing, because in the store you can buy potting soil, and people think that's what they should use in their containers. However, potting soil still has actual soil, sand, silt, and clay in it, and it's pretty heavy. It's probably okay to use on raised beds, but not in pots that are like 12, 15, 24-inch pots. What you want to use is potting mix. Potting mix contains peat moss, perlite, vermiculite. You use it in containers, and it's lightweight, which is nice because it's not too heavy to pick up, and it's easy to handle. And the peat moss actually keeps it a little more moist, and so helps with watering. So some best practices for your containers is fertilize. So of course, when you water and it drains through the bottom, you know, you're leaching some nutrients. Also, when you're doing vegetables in containers like this, it definitely uses more fertilizer than flowers. So I use in my containers Osmocote, because it is slow release over 3 months. So in a season, I'll have to just put it in twice. But, you know, I know some people like Miracle-Gro, you know, that's all fine. Just make sure you're adding some fertilizer. You do want to replace old soil. So if your pots are, if you're planting annuals, you know, you can get away with a couple of years with the same soil. If you're doing vegetables, you take off the top 6-8 inches every year and refresh with new potting mix. Also, you can see here, like when you're doing your pots, you can do some with vegetables and some with flowers, and it still looks really pretty. Also, if you plant tomatoes, you can plant it with a mix here. I have all herbs under that tomato plant. I have some basil, and I have some rosemary in there. But basil planted with tomato is not just a combination because that's what you eat together. The basil actually repels thrips and aphids and hornworm that eat the tomato. That's just a side thing. Okay, so then think about planting for all seasons. So if you have a pot in the front of your house, you can put a shrub in the middle and then the flowers. So when you take these flowers out, you still have something that looks nice, and you don't have to, you know, you can put lights on there, or just leave it as a green shrub, but you don't have an empty pot in front of your house. Even if you don't put a shrub in there, if at the end of the season you empty your pots, it's just my opinion, don't leave an empty pot by the front door, just move it into the garage. But it's not that welcoming if you have an empty pot, or if you have a pot with a dead plant in it. Please take the dead plant out. And, you know, think it's your front door. You want to welcome people. So this is our raised bed in at the Arboretum that I use for some of my groups that come in, and they actually made the sign there, but it's just a mix of flowers, and we get butterflies and birds, and we have goldfinches, and but that whole bed is filled with different, I made a potting soil mix basically for the raised bed there. So that is all I have. I know it's a ton of information, but if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. If you want me to answer your soil questions first, and then if you have any other garden questions, I'm totally happy to answer them as well. Thank you.
If you can ask it. We have a lot of shale. Is that clay?
So, shale is actually like a stone, and it's probably like a layer below. You might have clay on top of the shale. So the shale is not part of the soil, but it is gonna reduce your amount of drainage. It's because water will sit in that level, and there's not much you can do about it.
You have to break through it, I guess, to plant things.
Yeah, so how deep is the shale?
Not very deep, 6 inches maybe.
Oh, really? Yeah, so you have two options to try to break through it if you can, or do a raised bed above it. So it's actually, I know Home Depot actually sells raised beds like almost already made. So they have like planks, and then you just connect them pretty easily. And I know you guys have rules about vegetable gardens or whatever, but you could either do a raised bed, or you can, you know, even if you make a stone wall and fill it with soil, just so you have a higher amount of soil to plant in.
Thank you.
Yep.
Another question?
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other questions?
Here.
And
Yes.
what about hydrangea? I have hydrangea on the side of my house. They're purple flower. They seem to be growing more like a vine than a hydrangea. And lastly, what's the thought as to whether they should be pruned or cut back at the end of the season, or just let it die back and then just take out the dead plantings in the spring?
Okay, that's a really good question. So I'm not sure why it's growing like a vine. I don't know, because they can take part sun, part shade. Do you mean they're getting leggy? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, they're getting leggy. I wound up actually pruning it back.
Okay, so they're probably not getting enough sun, but you can prune them back. Here's the thing. You have to be careful with hydrangea. So you don't want to prune them in the spring. What you want to do is wait for them to bloom, and then you can The ones that have flowers on them, the dead flowers, you can cut those stalks back. Hydrangea will bloom on old wood, which means the wood that it develops this year is what it's going to get its flowers next year. So
Okay.
even if you go through the winter and then in the spring you think you're cutting back dead wood, you might not be. So you want to wait until it leaves out and then you can see where the buds are. So you can't just hack it down. And if you do just hack it down, you're just not going to get flowers that year, but the next year you will if you don't prune.
Okay, okay, thank you, Ann.
Any other questions out there?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.